Happy Monday afternoon. We're here to talk about that box office, of course. We're going to talk about the charts, Dan.
Yes, welcome back.
Thank you very much. I missed you. I missed the charts, and I missed another good weekend for Halloween. I was abroad.
That's right. You were out and about while Michael Myers was continuing to slash up the box office. And here's what Blumhouse likes. Halloween posted about a 58% drop between week 1 and week 2. That's about standard with what you would want to see from a blockbuster superhero film. We talk a lot of times about how Avengers movies, superhero films, movies that open really big drop 50 to 60% in their second weekend. That's about average. What is good about this weekend for Halloween is that the horror genre a lot of times has a much steeper drop. It's much more front-loaded, so you'll see drops 60 to 70, sometimes even more percent. So I'm sure Blumhouse is very happy to see that Halloween held about like an average movie that opens around $80 million, which it did, for it to have that kind of hold as opposed to a more steep hold in the horror genre. I think as if the reports weren't already out, as if their ears weren't already perked up enough to make a sequel, I think this is another indication for them that there may be or will be audience interest there should they decide to trot out whoever in the next installment of the Halloween franchise. I'm sure it'll be Michael.
Well, maybe
some
not.
form. Who knows?
Michael.
They've been monkeying around with it.
If you know anything about the Halloween genre, you know that no matter what,
Michael Myers always comes back.
Michael Myers comes back somehow, which will be interesting if and when we do get a sequel to this film, because this one was touted so much as Laurie's story. So where do you go from there? It's a question mark, but A Star is Born,
A Star is Born,
very different film, continues to hold on as well.
Not a question mark. Another week in the #2 spot, another week in front of Venom. But as you can see, week by week, Venom, of course, opened much bigger than A Star is Born, just by the nature of what those two movies are. But as you've seen, week by week, Venom started earning a little bit less, the window, and now A Star is Born is starting to outpace Venom week by week. It's been in second place above Venom now for a couple of weeks. A 26% drop.
We had sort of talked about that. We'd anticipated that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely one that's playing well. It's adding theaters. It added theaters this past weekend. Usually a movie that's been out for 3 or 4 weeks starts shedding theaters. That's what Venom's doing right now. It's adding theaters. It's holding really well. The soundtrack continues to do well. And I think you could see, depending on how big of a push they give it around Oscar time, how much Venom falls off in the next couple of weeks, you could see it really start closing the gap. And I could predict a scenario, even though Venom opened much bigger, I could predict a scenario where the final domestic gross for, not worldwide, but domestic gross for Star is Born and Venom are quite close.
I think that you're absolutely right, because A Star is Born is the kind of movie, and we talked about this, Venom as well a little bit, but in a different way. I anecdotally, this is not data, know several people that have seen this now multiple times. It's the kind of movie that lends itself to it. It's speaking to an audience that other films are not addressing, and the films that are going to be coming out in the next couple of months.
Yeah.
And by the way, dollars to donuts, Warner Brothers is going to do a massive Oscar push on this movie.
This is going to play through the end of this year.
Yeah.
I agree. They're going to re-release it probably around the early next year. Those grosses, I think I'll have to check the rule book, but I'm almost positive those grosses will count retroactively toward its 2018 gross. So yeah, this is going to play a lot longer than Venom, but Venom not doing too badly either. Still in #3. $500 million worldwide now. It passed that $500 million mark.
We'll definitely be seeing that sequel.
It hit, yes, we will definitely be seeing that sequel, and it hit another milestone that we're going to talk about later on in the show.
Excellent. Well, we have Goosebumps still in theaters.
Goosebumps again.
Kids Halloween movie.
Kids Halloween movie. Weekend before Halloween, people took the kids. That's another week in #4. And then #5, we mentioned last week, one of my favorite 4 words in the English language when you string them together, Gerard Butler submarine movie.
Yes.
Hunter Killer opens at #5. Not a great opening for Gerard Butler as far as his career, and this is one that's going to be hoping to have some international sea legs, because it's not going to do a whole lot here domestically.
No, Gerard Butler's had I think there's a whole other video on the trajectory of Gerard Butler's career.
It's crazy.
It's fascinating.
He was in Den of Thieves earlier this year, which actually did pretty well, and I liked that movie. I recommended it. Some people saw it as Heat Light, which I wouldn't disagree with, but I liked that movie. But he is on a roller coaster coaster.
He sure is, and it's like almost like this archetype for an actor in Hollywood. You know, he has these really high highs and these very low lows, and everything in between. He just kind of fascinates me. A horror movie that is out this weekend, a smaller one, is Suspiria, the remake of the D'Argento film Suspiria.
Yes.
And I was traveling. I haven't had a chance to see it yet. I'm desperate to see it. I hear I would say interesting things about it. Very divided.
It has been a very divisive film, both critically and commercially. You're not alone, Roth. Most people haven't had a chance to see this.
Clearly.
It was only open in 2 theaters, but it did notch the top per screen average of the year so far. We mentioned this with Free Solo did well, and then last week we talked about A Beautiful Boy has done really well. Mid-90s last week did really well. This is the kind of part of the time of the year when you see the per-screen averages really start kicking up because studios are rolling out a lot of their prestige films. Suspiria is one of those. It's directed by Luca Guadagnino, who did Call Me By Your Name, which was a Best Picture nominee last year. Almost not quite 100K, but it did really well per screen on 2 screens. That film is going to roll out to a few more hundred theaters this weekend, but not a film, from what I've heard, and I'm with you, I did not get a chance to see it this weekend. I planned to, and then, things happen. I am also very anxious and curious to see it because I love when I hear something about a movie like this where it's like,
you'll love it or hate it.
Exactly. You'll love it, you'll hate it, who knows, but we'll see. So Suspiria, as it expands to the rest of the country, we'll see what they think of it as well.
So The Predator has made its way to China.
That's right. Looking at the top 5 list worldwide, there's a movie there that you might not have thought about for a few weeks. I know I haven't. Yeah. The Predator is number 5 on the worldwide list, and that is because it had its Chinese opening this weekend. That's not going to really be enough to right the ship on this film. But looking at everything else, Halloween adds another $57 million. A Star is Born now out-earning Venom globally, largely because it's also out-earning Venom domestically. But A Star is Born is doing well internationally. Venom, however, is probably or potentially very, very likely going to be number 1 again on that chart next week because it opens in China and Japan, 2 major markets, this weekend. So it is very likely that we are going to see a big number from Venom on this chart next week. I've heard that it is potentially set to do a pretty substantial amount of business in China. So we could very easily see Venom jump back up to number 1 on the worldwide chart next week as it hits those 2 big markets.
Venom, for those who love Crazy Rich Asians, sadly, on the top 10 of 2018, Venom's bitten off the heads.
Yes.
Of the rom-com that could let's not understate the fact that Crazy Rich Asians did phenomenally well.
It's incredible that Crazy Rich Asians. Nobody would ever predicted, I think, at the beginning here that Crazy Rich Asians would have spent any time on the top 10 movies of 2018 domestic list. But yes, Venom has overtaken it. It will overtake A Quiet Place here in the next, probably today or tomorrow. It's very close to overtaking A Quiet Place. So that'll camp out in the top 10. I sincerely doubt that it's going to stay there. I think you're going to see Mary Poppins jump in there. I think you could see Wreck-It Ralph jump in there. A lot of the holiday releases. But again, if you would have told me at the end of last year that, JT, can you throw up that top 10, that chart again? If you would have told me that Venom would be jockeying for position on the top 10 list with Solo at the end of the year, I would have told you that you were a crazy person. However, that's just how it crumbles. And Venom has handily out-earned Solo worldwide, which is even crazier.
It is crazier. I mean, those two, looking at the trajectory of those 2 films, especially, this might be a different discussion, looking at films that hit or missed with critics and audiences or had mixed responses and performed versus didn't. Yeah. Let's take a look at some common threads there if we can.
Because Solo was garnered generally positive reviews.
It did,
Venom garnered generally negative reviews.
Audiences,
and yet here we are. Audiences went the other way.
Yes, they certainly did.
Yep.
Let's talk about horror movies because we've had an interesting debate all day long in this office as you did your charts about at what point, and we identified the line, which is pretty impressive of us.
That's true.
At what point is a movie no longer a horror movie? And that line, ladies and gentlemen, is Ghostbusters.
That's right, Roth. Halloween is just 2 days away, and I thought it'd be fun to look at some of the biggest horror hits of all time, some of the biggest horror hits decade by decade. But in compiling that list, The Office today was a buzz because as we were looking at the movies, I was judging what films should be on this list, what films shouldn't be on this list.
Is it a horror movie?
Is it a horror movie? Is it not? There were some
sci-fi?
like Fatal Attraction or Seven where I'm like, they share certain elements, but that's a thriller. That's not really a horror movie. However, there are a handful of films that seem to fall equally in the horror and not horror camp. And you're right. I have devised a line that will hereforth and such with, is that a word?
Yes.
Be known as the Ghostbusters line.
Heretofore, it is known as the line that shall not be crossed is Ghostbusters.
Yes.
That solves comedy. Like if it goes past a certain line, it's then a comedy or a spoof.
Or a spoof. Yes. Basically it was. There are a lot of movies that have elements of horror, but also belong to other genres.
Yes.
And so the Aliens is one of them.
Alien is a horror.
Alien is definitely a horror movie.
Aliens is often considered a action movie.
Yes, and you'll see which side of the Ghostbusters line we judged Aliens to be on.
Yeah.
This came down to straw polls, but basically what we determined is that just this side of not being a horror movie is Ghostbusters.
Yes.
It has just enough elements that we decided it was almost a horror movie. Some people would say that it is, but we deemed that it was not. However, that is the line of demarcation between horror and not horror. So as we discuss some of these films, we will talk about
why are they horror?
Why are they on this side of the Ghostbusters line, or why are they on that side of the Ghostbusters line?
Inside the horror line, Gremlins.
Yes, as you will see. And we'll talk about that.
We'll talk about that. Let's look at the top 5 domestic horror movies of all time.
So this would be the domestic list that most people look at. These are the highest grossing horror films domestically of all time. These are all judged domestically just because some of them going back, it's hard to find numbers past the early 80s for the US, even harder to find them for the world. So these will all be domestic, but a lot of these were also international hits. But this is the list when you're looking at what are the 5 highest grossing horror movies of all time domestically. These were the 5. It, of course, huge phenomenon.
Pretty safely within the line too.
They do. I mean, I Am Legend is the one that a lot of people are like.
Yeah.
We talked about it because we were like, oh, that's an action movie, but it has the scares, it has the monsters. We deemed it to be inside the Ghostbusters line.
It's inside the. I would agree 100%. It is inside the Ghostbusters line, but it is the one out of them that is debatable.
It's the closest. It is the closest. I understand the debate, and if you don't agree with any of these decisions, make your own charting show. What do you want from my life?
What do you want from my life is, I think, our new catchphrase here at ScreenJunkies. But also, you could just leave a chart or a list.
Yeah,
please, in comments.
Have a nice discussion.
Love to see that.
Let's have a discussion. Let's not yell at each other.
Top 5. Let's not yell at each other. That's our other catchphrase.
Yes.
Top 5 domestic adjusted for inflation.
So if you adjust for inflation, a couple of those movies stay on the list, but they jump way up the list. Jaws and The Exorcist being the two that are head and shoulders above the rest as far as the all-time list. They both, if you adjust those money, they would both be over $1 billion. The Sixth Sense stays on that list. This was the one that surprised me. House of Wax was the Avatar of its time.
Yeah.
It was in 3D. It was a big theatrical phenomenon. That would be almost a $500 million grosser if it were released today, and those numbers are the same. And then, as you mentioned, Roth, yes, Gremlins. This was another much debated film. Is it a horror movie? Is it not a horror movie? It was deemed to be just inside the Ghostbusters line.
Just barely.
It had just a few more horror elements. This was. I'm not joking about
this was a whole discussion.
This was an entire discussion. It was deemed
Multiple
that it had.
People weighed in.
It does have both horror and comedy elements, but we deemed that the horror elements drove the film more than the comedy elements, which, by the way, is why we decided Ghostbusters was out, because the comedy elements drove the film more than the horror elements.
Agreed. And yeah, exactly. Ghostbusters has more comedy. The comedy is more important than the horror in terms of the through line and the trajectory of the film.
Gremlins is more of a creature feature.
It's more of a creature feature. It's got monsters. It's also got a darkness to it, an edge to it that I think Ghostbusters doesn't quite. There's a softness there, you know. For example, and I said this earlier today, the Phoebe Cates story of Phoebe Cates' Christmas. It's also a Christmas movie, just so we know.
That is true.
But that, to me, alone tips the scales, where that is more darkly comedic than sort of straightforward slapstick comedic, which Ghostbusters.
Agreed.
Not that they're doing full slapstick, but that's more just of a dark comedy.
Yes.
That makes it more of a horror film. And you weigh in with your thoughts.
So we're
1980s.
All time is fun.
Yeah.
But we wanted to take a look through the modern era of horror. Again, as I said, as you go back further, it gets a little bit more difficult to pull figures. So there are movies that were made in the 70s, things like Halloween and The Exorcist, Jaws, obviously. Even if you go farther back, Rosemary's Baby, that were very high performers. But to be honest, I could have pulled those numbers, would have taken me an exceedingly long amount of time, and we still wouldn't be taping this show. So I had to go through the ones that were a little bit more accessible to me as far as the numbers go. So yeah, let's go through the last few decades of horror, look at the biggest hits decade by decade. And I like this because you get to look at a lot of different flavors, a lot of different genres, kind of see what the snapshot of where horror was at that time, and see the ones that didn't make it but were so influential. So let's start with the 80s.
Let's do it.
The era of Freddy and Jason. Yeah. Only one of them is on this list, however. Gremlins, number 1. Aliens, which we talked about, another one. Hotly debated. Some people would not put it in the horror category. I think it's like 51-49.
Yeah.
This is a very, very close one, but we did decide to include Aliens at number 2. Poltergeist, which I didn't see until very recently, I think is a great horror movie.
Oh, it's fantastic.
I had not seen it.
I
just saw it literally a few days ago.
Carol Ann.
It was so good.
I've seen a lot of Poltergeist in my life. I'm so delighted that you've had that experience in your life, Dan. That makes me very happy.
One that I didn't realize was such a huge hit was Pet Sematary. Number 4, that's being remade.
Yes,
that's a Stephen King adaptation.
Pet Sematary has one of the best child actor performances. I really believe Gage.
The little kid?
Yeah, Gage, who is so young, has to go from being truly, I think, the world's most adorable baby or toddler to being terrifyingly menacing. This kid is so good. He's so perfectly cast. I love Pet Sematary. What a great group of movies to have performed.
And then Nightmare on Elm Street, what I think is the most interesting Nightmare on Elm Street movie, stylistically rounds out the top 5, which I love that particular entry in the franchise. And can I just say, there's disagreement on the golden age of horror. Can we all agree that the 80s was like the golden age of poster? Look at those posters. Yeah. Those posters are so awesome.
Yeah, I think we can agree.
I love how they did movie posters. Now it's all just faces on top of each other. I
gotta say, for Nightmare, my favorite really is Dream Warriors. I also have a very soft spot for New Nightmare. But hey, all of this makes us appreciate that the audience is spending money on at least interesting horror films. Yeah, 4 I don't think is the best of the franchise by any means, but stylistically, that's the one I love to pop in and just like watch. Like, oh my God, they were going nuts. Have you gone any further with like Poltergeist gets so weird? I have not. I kind of want to just live in a world where I only have enjoyed one Poltergeist film, and I don't need to see, like, I've never seen any of the other Exorcist movies. There's an aspect to Poltergeist 2 that actually I enjoy. Okay. There's a very, very creepy character introduced in Poltergeist 2 that I really enjoy. 3 is where it gets nuts, and it's in New York, of course, because that's where all of the movies, the horror movies go. Yeah. I don't know. I kind of recommend it, Dan. Right. Maybe I'll break it. Maybe I'll check it out. Maybe just out of curiosity, I'll check it out. Let's look at the 90s. The 90s, kind of the reinvention of horror. Now, the Scream franchise didn't quite make it because you saw, and again, there'll be debate, but this was where you saw some of the studios do sort of what I call the prestige horror film. The Sixth Sense, obviously, leading the way. The Mummy. On the Ghostbusters line, people saying, like, I will agree. It has the jump scares. The Mummy is classic a horror icon. It is a classic monster, so we include it in horror. The Blair Witch Project, obviously, as far as finances go, the biggest hit, return on investment by far. Yeah, and it birthed found footage. It did birth in the found footage genre, which we are still going through. And then The Silence of the Lambs, a Best Picture winner, a different kind of horror. Yeah. But I think Hannibal Lecter, I was watching... there's a show on AMC called The History of Horror right now that Eli Roth did, and Hannibal Lecter had his own segment. I think he's definitely a horror icon. Oh, sure. I mean, Hannibal, both book, and there's a show, Hannibal, that was really beautiful. I don't know if you ever watched it. I didn't. I heard it was good, and then it was gone. Yeah. So. It is some of the most gorgeous gore, and I mean this truly, like stylistically, it is absolutely stunning gore. Yeah. It's a really great character-driven show, but also beautifully shot. David Slade, I think, did the pilot and a number of other episodes as a director. In any event, I love that series.
And Interview with a Vampire, number 5. Another one that some people say, like, is that a horror movie? I think it is. It's gothic horror. It's a different kind of horror.
They're vampires.
They're vampires. There's gore.
Yeah.
They're jumping around and murdering people and doing what they do.
That's my favorite Kristen Dunst performance still.
She was really good in that movie.
She's so good in that movie.
You should watch. Have you seen her on Fargo?
She's great in Fargo. She's great in Fargo. I agree. But I had been a big fan of the Anne Rice novels.
Oh, okay.
And I'll admit, and I know this is not a take people will love, I did not love his Lestat. I really didn't. But I loved her Claudia.
Well, there you go.
I believe it was Claudia. Let's look at the 2000s.
The 2000s. The aughts. Is it the aughts? Let's look at the aughts.
I don't know what anything's called anymore.
I don't either. I Am Legend, as we mentioned, sort of a one that it's a mixed genre. As a lot of mixed genres here. The Signs. This movie scared the bejesus out of me, so I definitely count it as horror. I think it's meant to scare you. It's alien horror. Hannibal, the sequel to Silence of the Lambs. What Lies Beneath, which I feel like has kind of been lost a little bit. What Lies Beneath was the movie that Robert Zemeckis did when he had to stop filming Castaway so Tom Hanks could lose a bunch of weight. And in the middle, he made What Lies Beneath.
And Harrison Ford, this was one of Harrison Ford's like forays into taking on a very different kind of character.
A very different role. It's sort of a riff on Hitchcock.
Yeah.
It is. I haven't seen it since it came out, but I feel like I want to revisit it because
it's a good ghost story.
Yeah, it's like a mystery ghost story.
Yeah.
I like this kind of movies that are about like, is this person crazy? Is this person not? Yeah. I want to revisit that, but I feel like that's a movie that doesn't get talked about much anymore. And then number 5 is The Ring, which was sort of the leading edge of the J-horror adaptation that we saw with The Grudge and a lot of other films in the 2000s, and we still see a few of them now, but yeah, there you go.
The Ring, I got to admit, it scared the crap out of me.
It's a creepy movie.
It's super creepy.
It's super creepy.
Some people find it not scary at all, which I understand. I saw it, I think, at midnight, like on Halloween night, or like,
well, that'll do it. Yeah.
Maybe I'm making that up, but it felt to me like all of the elements had conspired to scare the crap out of me.
Yeah.
I think I've told you this story before. I went home that night with and was very afraid, and somebody said, "Well, I would just beat her up with a baseball bat if she came," and I'm like, "She's made of TV. You can't beat her up."
She is made of TV.
She's made of TV.
That's true.
The last decade.
This decade,
still some more to come.
In progress. Now, this number 5, I'm just going to get right ahead of you. I don't care if you think The Meg should be at number 5 or not. And you know what? Ultimately, it doesn't matter because within about a week, it's going to be replaced by Halloween. So if you disagree with The Meg being there, just wait 7 days and it'll be gone. It, obviously, World War Z, which I forget how big of a hit World War Z was. A Quiet Place, a movie from this year. Get Out, a movie from this year. Last year. It, obviously, from last year. So these last few years have been pretty big for horror. Split just missed. That would have been number 5 if The Meg wasn't there.
Pretty big and largely really good. 3 of those movies are fantastic. I liked World War Z.
I liked it, yeah.
Do you remember the hullabaloo around World War Z?
Oh, it was going to be awful. It was a catastrophe.
It was going to be awful. It was a catastrophe. They had to reshoot, and which they did. They largely reshot that movie.
Yeah.
But of course, the interesting thing about reporting those things is that oftentimes when they reshoot, they fix the problem. That's the point.
I think that reshoots have
a bad name.
They do. They've gotten a little better because now, Marvel does them all the time and people are just like, oh, that's normal.
They're built into the budget.
But a lot of times they're not normal. And a lot of times it does end up being like Fantastic Four, for example, being one that was heavily reshot and did not end up well. I think World War Z was one of those that sort of defied the conventional wisdom where they did extensive. That's where you have to worry about it. Extensive reshoots.
Extensive reshoots, but they clearly solved the problem that was there.
Whatever the problem was, they solved it.
Yeah.
So I remember Matthew Fox, I think, got cut down to basically a cameo.
Yeah, pretty much.
Due to those reshoots. But from what I've read, I think maybe that was probably the right choice.
There's certainly films where extensive reshoots have only meant a more, like, imagine what some of those movies would have looked like. Fantastic Four is one of the movies that I would have loved to see.
I wanted to see what it would have been if they had
pre-reshoots.
I agree. I wish I could see that.
I wish I could see that movie.
So Roth, that takes us up the 80s to today. We're like an oldies radio station. Yeah. We're just a radio station. I don't want to say oldies, even though it is now. Any favorites in there? Any ones that you particularly enjoy?
So many favorites. I think this last year has delivered a ton of great horror. I don't know. I'm trying to think. There were only a handful that I don't like.
Yeah.
Or that I wouldn't count among some of my favorites. And those were the ones actually more that popped out. That's not my favorite nightmare movie.
Sure.
It's not that I think it's trash.
Yeah.
It's not.
It's different. It's a different
one.
It's a different
The
frequency.
Meg is not my favorite movie of the year.
No, I'm glad The Meg is going to get tossed off that list because Halloween is much more worthy of being on that list than The Meg.
But even just this last year with Get Out and It. And A Quiet Place, I loved all of those movies for very different reasons.
I think it's almost interesting to see the movies that aren't on those lists as the ones that are. Like I mentioned, the Scream franchise, so influential, not on that list. The slasher resurgence of the 90s, I Know What You Did Last Summer and Urban Legend, the Final Destination movies. Yeah. I think it kind of shows you how in the margins horror often works. None of the Paranormal Activity movies were on that list.
That's actually shocking.
Partly because, as some people would say, like, well, because they put movies that aren't horror movies on there. That's because horror plays in a lot of different genres. Yeah. But I think part of it is that it is a franchise that is sort of always playing with whatever's they're being given, and they're sort of playing in the backyard a lot, and oftentimes very successfully.
Horror is really fascinating, and I love that discussion today that we had. Because the boundaries, I think you said this, and you're totally right. You either have to cast a very, very wide net or a very, very narrow net when you're going to define horror, because it plays with so many different genres. So I think that's one of the fascinating things. You know what? Some of these reports, these charts make me heartened to see.
What's that?
Is that most of those movies are really good movies.
Yeah.
And so that tells me for a lot of the times, in large part, as much as we don't think we get it right at the box office.
Sometimes we do.
Sometimes we do.
Sometimes we do.
We get it right.
We get it right.
This weekend.
Let's see if we get it right this weekend, Ross. Bohemian Rhapsody. That's been a very critically divisive movie. Roth and I think that if you go see it this weekend, you'll get it right. But a lot of critics disagree with us. Yeah. So I don't know.
Well, I mean, wigs, teeth, and acting, and Freddie Mercury.
And Freddie Mercury and great music.
Great music. And Queen, who's a great band.
Rami Malek is great.
Rami Malek is great. Some people think that we don't. Look, this isn't the greatest biopic ever made. It's not Amadeus, which we were really clear about.
No.
That said, it's just sort of a fun movie with great music and a really good performance.
Yeah.
And Queen is an amazing band.
Queen is a great band. Nobody, if you haven't been to a Tiffany Haddish movie in a couple of weeks, Roth, you're in luck. You got your Haddish fix because she's back.
Yeah.
In another movie, Nobody's Fool from Tyler Perry. So you got that one going on this weekend.
She's working a lot.
She's working all the time, and do it. Yeah. That's what I say.
Do it.
Do it. Yeah. If people want to give you a job, take the job.
I love her.
She never phones it in.
I love her. She is always great. The movies that she's been in this year haven't always earned her, is what I thought.
But
agree. Some of them did.
She's always there doing her best.
She's doing her job. The movie's not always doing its job.
And then this is a movie.
The Nutcracker.
The Nutcracker in the Four Realms. It's from Disney.
Yeah.
And I obviously I'm not the target market, but I feel like even movies that Disney did that maybe weren't so big, like A Wrinkle in Time earlier this year, it feels like there's always some buzz or push behind them. This there's zero cultural. I have no sense that this movie is coming out at all. It's very strange.
I have seen so many ads for this movie.
Have you?
I really have, and I'm not sure why I have seen so many ads for this movie. But I really have, and I'm still unclear exactly who's in it, but it doesn't really matter because I believe it's Keira Knightley.
Morgan Freeman?
I think Morgan Freeman.
Let's see. I think Morgan Freeman.
And that's the weird part, but it's the Nutcracker, which is sort of, I mean, this is an interesting one to me. It's like you're either attracted to that story, which I've only ever seen as a ballet, and I've seen it a lot as a ballet.
All right.
But I've never, I don't know. I have lukewarm curiosity about it.
Maybe the marketing's just going way over my head, and it's going to be huge. But it's just one of the, like Disney, there's usually like a big juggernaut behind it, and I feel like maybe it's all just directed to my left and right. I'm just not getting any of it.
To the kids.
Limited release, Boy Erased starts its limited run with Russell Crowe, Nicole Kidman, Lucas Hedges. This is a big Oscar buzzy movie, festival favorite. So that's its run. And then, as we mentioned before, Suspiria expanding to a few hundred theaters this weekend. Beautiful Boy, which came out in limited run a couple weeks ago, also expanding to a few hundred theaters this weekend.
I saw Boy Erased, actually. This is directed by Joel Edgerton, who is also in the film. Joel Edgerton is... he did The Gift.
The Gift, great movie.
And love that movie. And he's sort of like a very exciting new director, actor-director. Not new. He's done, what, how many now?
Directing?
Yeah.
I feel like he's always done way more than I remember that he's done.
Me too. That said, you know what? Let's talk about this movie after you see it.
Okay.
Let's talk
Maybe
about
I'll get a chance. It's in 5 theaters. I'm guessing we're lucky to be here in LA, so I'm guessing it'll be playing at one of them. I'm going to try to go see it this weekend, and we'll talk about it.
All right.
Sounds
I'm
like
going
fun.
to try to go see Suspiria.
Yes, and then we should talk about that too. And then we'll talk about it with you.
And you guys let us know what you think.
Where do you fall on the Ghostbusters line? Let us know in the comments.
Where do you
below.
fall on the Ghostbusters line?
I fall on the side where everyone's happy.
I want to be on that side.
I know,
Can
right?
I come over?
Come over. It's fun on this side of the line.
Great.
Thanks for watching.